Hey guys, Nicolette here with Insomnicat Media. Today, Bryan and I are going to chat with MakerBot CEO Nadav Goshen about all things MakerBot, including its transformation. Nadav will also talk to us a little bit about the importance of storytelling in your company's strategy. And we'll also get some tips for aspiring entrepreneurs. So stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Nicolette with Insomnicat Media, and Bryan and I have an exciting guest on today. Nadav Goshen, CEO of MakerBot, joins us today. Hi, Nadav. How are you?
Hey, how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
For coming on. For the audience who doesn't know much about MakerBot or yourself, can you first start out and tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience and the road that led to MakerBot?
Sure. I joined MakerBot about 4 years ago, and in my past, what I used to do is turn around, mostly in the software and SaaS space, and I was also advising to the board of Stratasys, which is the parent company of MakerBot at that time, and I think they asked me to join and lead MakerBot about 4 years ago, and I think my experience is mainly in transforming digital businesses into new areas and focus mostly on product and go-to-market aspects of the business. And I'm happy to do so for MakerBot.
Awesome. Now, I mean,
Very
your
exciting.
skills do range quite a bit, though, Nadav. You've got a tech background, you've got a product background, you've got a marketing background. What do you attribute that rounded skill set to, personally?
There is this, I think, 10,000 hours rule. And so I started coding when I was 12 and 13, about 12 or 13 years old. So I have like a very in-depth, at least software technical background. And I was driven to technology, from very early on. My father is like an engineer, electrical engineer. So like from very young, I was driven by two main, I would say, areas. One is technology, and the other is art and photography. And kind of that drove me throughout my career to find ways to combine it. And I think entrepreneurship and I would say product and marketing related companies are a great match to my expertise.
Right. So that's interesting because I sort of grew up in a very similar thing. I started coding really young. Now, and it wasn't my father, but one of my good friends' father was an EE. And actually, what was nice is we were able to use a lot of the tools he had. Did you experience that, where you were able to access some of the tools and the computer and the coding pieces he had to build other stuff out of when you were young?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I got my first computer for my bar mitzvah when I was 13, and that was the gift that changed my life. And my father had a lot, and still have a lot of cool tools laying around the house, and I played around with that. And I think when connecting it to either what we do here in MakerBot or what I believe in, when you have access at early age for all of these tools and tech enablers, I think you develop skills that would have not been developed otherwise. And I think this kind of hands-on experience is a very important part of education. And by the way, and this is what contributes to, I would say, myself, because it's not only the formal education, it's also the mistakes and all of this improvisation that you experience. And when you're young, you are very not limited by any constraints. So you tend to, push boundaries and try to do things that teach you a lot.
Absolutely.
So of all of these hats that you wear, Nadav, I mean, which has been the most challenging for you? Which is the one that really makes you sweat a little bit?
So, by the way, I wish it was only one, but you know, being a CEO of a tech company in a transition mode, you know, requires a bit of, I would say, endurance. But let's look about MakerBot. I think MakerBot was, you know, built upon a promise of a consumer offering, and when I took on board, you know, I think that promise, I would say my interpretation of it at that time was that this promise will not be fulfilled at the very near future, and so we had to pivot away from it, just because the technology was not mature enough, and I would say the customer needs were not as strong as in other areas. So I think looking at that, and in my strategic hat at that time, was how do I take something that was built for, I would say, a certain area and transform it into something else. And so that was challenging, and I think we then decided to focus on education and professionals as target industries, and kind of move away from a B2C into a B2B company, and that's not an easy transformation to make.
Well, actually, this kind of, you know, when I'm thinking actually leads, you know, you lead into one of the questions we had. You know, MakerBot's undergone some changes, which you mentioned, and so what we'd like to know is how is the new technology that the company is putting out really a symbol of the overall evolution and its mission?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, you know, you know, I'm looking at the you know, the wall in front of me, and I think the mission of MakerBot is that there is an innovator in everyone, and I think that vision still, you know, I would say encompass everything we do here in MakerBot, but we changed the way and mission that we are, you know, supporting to deliver that vision. And when you look at the roadmap of MakerBot, you know, at the beginning there were like kind of wooden kit printers, and when you look at Method and Method X today, you see a professional machine that has, I think, 12 or even more PCBAs, which are like boards in it, and everything is automated, and it produces ABS parts which were not available in any price point until Method X came to life. So it's a huge evolution, and it took us many years to develop this Method platform, but the merit of it was trying to get something which is inaccessible to the market, and that was the origin of MakerBot. They wanted to drive 3D printing and make it more accessible. At that time, it was for the consumer space, and what we did now, we took an industrial grade system which was inaccessible because it was very expensive, and it still is very expensive and not very easy to use, and made it in, I would say, a third of the price, and something that you can operate without any manual, just, you know, follow our online instruction, on-screen instructions on the machine itself. So, and I think this enables many more applications that were unlocked just because the technology was not accessible. So that accessibility and, I would say, user experience thread, you know, relies all the way from the beginning of MakerBot up to Method. But the technology is a completely different one. And I think, how do you take something that was, at the beginning was, I would say, not very tech and focus company, and make MakerBot what it is today, which is, like, I would say, one of the front lines in 3D printing technology, and taking something that is, let's say, available in the market for like 10 times more expensive than what we have today in Method, required a lot of investment and making sure that you are still delivering on that spec and performance that is expected from a professional grade printer.
So do you see, so I guess how do you see, as, especially in certain spaces, right, in technology spaces, especially in electronics, we see a lot of people starting to 3D print certain things. How do you see that affecting, like, in the future, like procurement and the supply chain? Like we see there's 3D printers on, on the, being used by NASA, right? So how do you think that's going to change as people are able to 3D print some of these more complicated, as 3D printers become more complicated? How is that supply chain and procurement going to evolve? That piece of the business, do you think?
Yeah. By the way, I think when you look at the market and 3D printing in general, there are like a very clear differentiation between what we call, like, let's say, desktop printers and professional industrial ones. So desktop printer print in PLA plastic, which is like a biodegradable, polymer. So this is not the plastic that is being used in all of the products that we, use on a day-to-day basis. And that's a specific blend that was made for 3D printing, for desktop 3D printing, but it's not for manufacturing. When you look at in the industrial side, and there is what we call, or what is an ABS plastic, which is the plastic that we all know. This is the one that is being injection molded in all of the products around us. So, and to have a 3D printer that supports ABS without compromising on, mechanical properties or geometry freedom, was required an investment of an industrial printer. With Method X, I think we bring it to a wider reach, because I would say the investment required to really get something that can manufacture end-use parts became now, let's say, a quarter of the equivalent price. And what this means is that, like, more small organizations and companies can now tap into additive manufacturing, which was not accessible for them before. And I give an example, and you're talking about how is that going to change supply chain, is like a company that is our customer, and they use Method X to print housing equipment for their electronic devices that are being spread across fields, agricultural fields in the U.S., and they use Method X to print the housing on what we call a limited run end-use parts. So the equivalent for them was to either set a manufacturing line or to outsource it to a different company or to a service bureau, and then it's a different process, different timeline, and probably is more limiting than having an access in-house to what we call a manufacturing workstation. And that's going to change manufacturing, because many more participants in manufacturing can now start, and open to smaller production runs than before. So supply chain, parts, we're talking about, replacement parts. So you need to, manufacture them in batches and have them stored somewhere. And then you need to manage it and deliver it across, the world, because there is some missing part in, India, and it's being stored in the U.S. So all of this carbon footprint that, tails to that part can potentially disappear if you just print it on demand in the location that you need it. Yeah.
Very cool.
So I think we'll see more. We'll see more and more stories and use cases like that. Additive manufacturing will become more and more accessible.
So, in addition to what we just talked about with supply chain, we'd love to hear your thoughts on 3D printing trends, and what you consider to be a big focus in the industry and for MakerBot currently, right now, at this time.
Yeah. So I think the main, I would say, overarching trend in 3D printing is, I would say, accessibility, in which you take an exclusive technology and you make it in a way that can be open to a wider reach. And I think that's a thread that, by the way, it's not only for 3D printing, it's for all of the, I would say, the complex technologies. At start, it's become something like a mainframe, like we talk about computing, like it started as a mainframe that is like, very complicated to operate, and it's also, probably, the cost of it is inaccessible for even a company, mid-sized company. And then as time passes, this technology becomes more and more, I would say, affordable and easy to use, and until it reaches, eventually a consumer level, if that is the case. So I think that that's something that happens with 3D printing. And of course, down that path, there are few aisles to take. One, the aisle that compromises on the performance and on the results. So say we can take it and make it cheaper, but we are compromising on the performance. And the other is like we're trying to do it and keep and make sure that we're still delivering on that original, I would say, technology that was delivered. So this is something that is happening. I think we are, MakerBot is in the front of it, and I think that's something that can continue to happen. On the other hand, is just adding more and more materials. As I said, it started in the desktop one started in PLA, and we know that there are companies now that print in metal. So all of this material advancement is very important, and I think it will open more and more applications for additive manufacturing. And so we need to combine these two major trends, which is like making it more accessible at one hand and adding more and more material capabilities on the other hand. I think the future of additive manufacturing and 3D printing is really limitless. And I think this is what I think the reason that 3D printing is very exciting and is because of that, I would say, futuristic kind of appeal that 3D printing has. And I think it will fulfill all of these expectations. It might take, and it did take, more than expected. And I think like at the beginning, people, like every hyped or I would say innovative technology, there is this cycle when people believe in it and they think that it will be quicker than it will at the end happen. Right. So also 3D printing had the same cycle. Like at the beginning, everybody was so excited, and they thought like, hey, in 2 years we're gonna, scrap everything and everybody will print, their spare parts in their basements. But that's not the case, and it's not the case even in the next 2 years. But still, the potential is there.
Well, Nadav, you tell an amazing story about, just in this short time, about your road to MakerBot, about the MakerBot evolution and the future of 3D printing. And we love storytelling. So, I mean, you also mentioned storytelling a little bit, on LinkedIn. And we would just like to hear, is there a way, if at all, that you weave storytelling into your current leadership role at MakerBot? Because we believe everybody and every company has a story to tell. So that's a really important question for us.
No, by the way, I think, strategy and storytelling goes hand to hand. Because if you cannot communicate your strategy, then you cannot, drive anything forward. And I think this is part of how I think storytelling is important in business. And I study cinematography, which is all about storytelling. And I think the basics of strategy and comedy were written in Rome, at that time, and everything from that time on is a variation of it. And I think it created a world of that around us. And I think if you are not capable of taking your strategy and communicate it in a clear way to a wider group, then there is no way for you to succeed in business. And I think MakerBot and any other company that is going through a transition has to be much more focused on that aspect, because it's a change, and change management. It's not only changing, technology behind what we do. It's also changing how people think and operate, and the way to do so is by enabling them to really understand what's behind what they're doing, and that's valid for every business. But it's extremely important when you do a transition. So for a company that is undergoing a transition, the articulation of why we do things and how is that should be, I would say, encompasses into everyone's part of the journey is very important. So I truly believe in that aspect of, I would say, management, which is clear storytelling, which for me, that's part of strategy.
Absolutely. So what one piece of advice would you actually give like young entrepreneurs or young engineers, that are just starting their tech company?
I think the best, like all of the advices, like, are already given, like fail fast, I don't think, I think like just giving like another bombardic word or sentence will just, will not contribute to the entrepreneurship world. But what I can say from my experience is that, people tend to analyze too much. At the end of it, I believe that if you're an entrepreneur, you have some basic instinct or basic appeal for something. And if you don't follow it, you just become like all of the larger corporations that have much more budget than you to do research and get into a conclusion. So entrepreneurs are in this stage of life or cycle of a company that is very well suited for taking risks. So I think that's part of being an entrepreneur. Take risks and trust your guts and instincts and make decisions based on that. To an extent that you're reasonable and analyzing the decisions, but trying to over-calculate and overly think decision, that's not the right stage to do so. So trust your gut.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Nadav. Thank you so much again for talking with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. And, anything else in the future, and if you want to learn more about MakerBot or learn what we're doing, just go to MakerBot.com and feel free to contact me either through the company or through LinkedIn or whatever, and I'll be happy to give more advices.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank
Have
you,
a wonderful day.